Hey everybody, thanks for checking out our Sunday Service podcast. This is a live recording of our Sunday service, and we hope you are encouraged and challenged by what you hear. We are in a series called The Invitation of Jesus. The invitation Jesus makes is gracious and challenging. He invites us to come and follow, come and die, come and rest. So what does it mean to follow Jesus? The invitation is both loving and hard, gracious and challenging, life-giving and life-defining. Are you going to say yes? We hope you enjoy week 3, the final week of our series, The Invitation of Jesus.
But today we're finishing a conversation called The Invitation of Jesus. Next week we're starting a conversation, our Christmas series. It's called He Shall Be Called. And so we'd invite you to jump into that. Don't start on Christmas Eve. Start next week as we start a conversation. I want to know by a raise of hands, how many have already decorated for Christmas? How many are already decorated for Christmas? Yeah, right? How many are like traditional after Thanksgiving or it's not right? Yeah, okay. So it's about 50-50. I get that. Hey, I am so like that. I'm like, we got to get through Thanksgiving. And then we had kids. And once you have kids that can vocalize their opinion, it changes everything. And so pretty much once Halloween ended, it was kind of like, when are we putting up the Christmas decor? When are we putting up the Christmas decor? And so last weekend, we put up the Christmas decor and we watched Christmas movies and the kids had an absolute blast. So we have transitions from being a post-Thanksgiving to a pre-Thanksgiving. And who knows, maybe we're going to be like a post-January family too. I don't know. The kids get the call, the shots nowadays. Here's what I have for us this morning. I have this, and I want to see if you can relate. We need rest. We need rest. So next 35 minutes, you can take a nap if you want, right? Some of you will, and I'll watch you. I'm just kidding, right? But we need rest. And here's the thing, right? You don't realize you need rest until you kind of hit the wall of needing rest sometimes. You don't realize you need rest until you hit the wall of rest. I remember when my kids were in the napping stage, right? And they would just fight us. They'd fight us to take naps, right? They're like, you got to take a nap. And so you're like, they would get up, they'd stand in the crib, they'd yell back at us. And so you're kind of like holding the kid down to try to get them to take a nap, right? Sometimes you're like bopping them around the house for an hour, try to get them a nap, right? They didn't want a nap because they didn't think they needed a nap. And what's funny is I would come home from work and I would be playing on the floor with them. And this still happens today. And I'd be playing on the floor with them and I would fall asleep, right? Yeah, I got a head nod over here. Like dad's in the room. I don't know if you've done this, right? You get into that position where you're kind of like side leaning and you're like playing whatever. And then you're just gone. And I wake up to my son going, Dad, wake up. Dad, wake up. And I'm like, oh, I'm so sorry, right? And it just happens. It just happens. My kids have no concept for needing rest. I have very much so a concept for needing rest because I've hit that wall. We all in this room, though, very, very, very practically and very spiritually, we need rest. We need rest. And this morning, you might resonate with that statement for a few different reasons. Maybe for some of you, you are living in a cultural restlessness or a worldly restlessness where the world is offering so much or the news is offering so much or your job is telling you to go faster, whatever it may be, the world around you is restless and it's impacting your ability to feel rested. So it's go, go, go. Check the social media. Check the email. It's got to be at the office at this time and leave at this time. It's got all the world news coming in. And so this morning when I check it, all these things are happening. I got to process that and you feel restless because of those things. Some of you right now, you're sitting here and you don't feel rested because of circumstances in your life that are creating restlessness. And if that's you for one reason or another, whether you're going through something medically right now, you're going through life changes right now, you're a single mom trying to figure out how to do life and work job and kids, or maybe your work is really stressful, or maybe you're in some sort of emotional and mental kind of moment with others and you're trying to navigate all of these different things and you're at this point where you're like, thanks a lot for talking about rest, Joel. I feel it, I need it, but nothing is breaking for me to get it. Maybe you sit here and that's the restlessness you're in. For others of us, Maybe it's internal restlessness, where there's something that sits inside of you this morning. You walk in and you're unsettled, you're not able to navigate the world around you. You don't feel rested. You don't feel like you're able to take the next day. You don't feel like you know who you are or what you're supposed to do. You're not sure where to go next. You feel like you're just kind of running around with your head off, right? And you're just trying to figure out, what does the next hour or day look like? I don't know. Or maybe you are experiencing all three. No matter where you're at this morning, I want you to find yourself. Because we said this a few weeks ago, in this room, what we do is not simply informational, it's very spiritual. And so the question I want you to ask yourself is, are you restless this morning? It don't matter why you're restless, are you restless? Are you burdened this morning? Are you worn out this morning? Are you feeling exhausted this morning? Are you burnt out this morning? Are you running into Thanksgiving wondering, how are we going to do Thanksgiving? And then you're like, I got to turn around and do that Christmas, right? What's that going to look like? This morning, the invitation that Jesus is going to give us is profound, beautiful. It is invitational, and yet it's baffling, hard to get my hands around, not always sure how it works, not always sure how I should feel about it. St. Augustine puts it like this. He's talking to God in the midst of this quote. You have made us for yourself, God, and our heart is restless until it rests in you. That what we'll find in this morning is this, is that any restlessness that you are experiencing is not simply isolated circumstances that you solely are running into. It is collectively umbrellaed under a restlessness that every human is going to experience. And that restlessness will only be solved by finding our rest in God, in Jesus. Jesus' invitation goes like this. Matthew 11, 28 through 30. Come to me, all you who are weary and burdened, and I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you and learn from me, for I'm gentle and humble in heart, and you will find rest for your souls. For my yoke is easy and my burden is light. Jesus invites us to rest in him. This morning, the invitation of Jesus is come and rest. The invitation of Jesus is come and rest. 2 weeks ago, we started this conversation, and we said the invitation of Jesus is come and follow me. So if you missed that week, go back to our podcast, listen to it. It set this whole thing up. What it means to follow Jesus, what it means to be a fisher of men, what it means to make disciples, and we looked at that. Last week we looked at come and die is what Jesus invites us to. Come and die to ourselves so that we can live for Jesus. Come and die to our desires so that we can live for who he is and what he has done for us. This week is come and rest. Now, eyes up here, okay? Because I'll be transparent and honest with you if you engage in an honest and transparent way. How's that sound, okay? So cool? Okay. So when I talk about this, I struggle with this sometimes, okay? Because I read this and then I go back to my life and these things feel like they collide. Where I'm like, Jesus promises this, says, come to me and find rest. Come and I have rest for your soul. And I'm like, that sounds awesome. That sounds so cool, but it sounds like I need to go buy a cabin in the Smoky Mountains and just hang out there endlessly to find that rest. Like, I'm not sure where that, like I go to work and it's not restful. I love who I work with and I love what I do, but it's not restful, right? I go home, it ain't restful at home. 6, 5, and 4-year-old run around, it ain't restful, right? I go out and do different things and help different people, right? It's not restful. There's things coming in, it doesn't feel restful. And so I read this from Jesus. And I'm like, how does this translate? Where do I go with this? How do I navigate this? And so if you're sitting here and you're like, one, this is awesome, this sounds great, but Joe, I'm not even sure how this is going to integrate into my life, right? I've been there, I am there currently, I'm wrestling with this, and I want you to know that it's not just you. You're not in an isolated thought process. That's why we're going to wrestle with this. If you're here and you're like, nope, I don't need this conversation. I got it figured out. I just run faster than rest, right? I want you to listen in because I've done that and it hasn't necessarily played out the way that I've wanted it to, right? And so if you're here and you're like, I just run faster, I don't need it, right? I would just hang tight and listen, right? And then here's the goal. Here's the goal. Is not that we come up with a plan that's going to solve our rest completely today. But my prayer is this, is that as we launch into this, that we would accept the invitation of Jesus to take a step with him in it. Everything starts with a step. And I think we live in a cultural moment that kind of disregards rest. Rest is an option, and it's something that maybe is not so valued. And I think Jesus invites us very specifically into this. And here's why. I think rest is here, and the invitation of rest is here because God knows that we're restless. Now, God, when he created the heavens and the earth, he instituted a day of rest. Not so much because he needed to rest. He's God. He can do whatever he wants, right? But rather, he wanted to institute and put into practice. First, he demonstrated it, and then he invited us into it to remember that we need to rest in him. That ultimately, he provides for us what we cannot provide in ourselves. That it reminds us that our faith and our trust should be in him, that he's in control and we are not. But when sin entered, everything changed. We went from the garden of rest to wanderers who are restless. And what's interesting is this, is that sin is not simply behavioral, okay? Sin is not simply behavioral. It's first natural, then it's relational. Yes, it's behavioral. It's also detrimental. Sin has a lot of facets, and one of them is detrimental. That what was meant to be good has been flipped on its head, and now we exist in a world that is impacted by sin all the time, both internally in us and externally our world around us. And so that is going to dictate how the world lives and how the world is navigated and how the world plays out. And it is going to be detrimental to us. And so we're living in a restless state, personally, in a restless world that is longing for rest and longing to go the journey and find that. The gardens where rest was, we became restless wanderers. Now, what's interesting about being restless is this, is that it's not simply that you and I need a nap. Now, maybe some of you do, okay? We might just need a nap some days. But restlessness goes deeper. It's not simply physical rest. There is a restlessness that goes deeper that ultimately drives me into the deepest questions of my life. Because what happened when you and I became restless wanderers, we started asking questions like, who am I? Where do I belong? Am I secure here? Do I have meaning and purpose? When we're restless in our identity, security, meaning in life, we start to ask these questions and we start to look for different things to answer them. So it's not just simply that sin is behavioral, it tells me what to do wrong. Sin is confusing me, and it ultimately leads me into a path of trying to find my answers in and of myself. We see this play out with the Israelites. And what's interesting is this, the Israelites, we see Adam and Eve, they're exiled out of the garden, and then they start a family, and then if you read throughout Genesis, you see the Israelite people grow, and they're God's chosen people. They are enslaved in Egypt for 400 years between Genesis and Exodus, okay? You enter Exodus, and you read the story of the Israelites. They're enslaved in Egypt for 400 years, and they were in a constant restless state. They were constantly restless physically, because they were slaves. They were constantly restless about who they were because they've lost their complete identity. They went from being God's chosen people to now being slaves of the Egyptians. They've lost meaning and purpose. Everything is restless for 400 years. Then God rescues them through Moses, Aaron, and leads them towards the promised land. But in between Egypt and the promised land is this desert that they hang out in for a little while. And God provides for them in the desert. He takes them from a place of restlessness to a place of rest. And he provides for them very specifically so that they can rest. We read this in Exodus 16. The whole Israelite community set out for Elam and came to the desert of Sin, which is just an interesting desert name, right? You're like, wonder what happened there, which is between Elam and Sinai, on the 15th day of the second month after they come out of Egypt. So they're out of Egypt for a little while. In the desert, the whole community grumbled against Moses and Aaron. The Israelites said to them, if only we had died by the Lord's hand in Egypt. There we sat around pots of meat and ate all the food we wanted, but you have brought us out into the desert to starve this entire assembly to death. Which is interesting, right? They're just grumbling. They've just been freed from their slavery, and now they're like frustrated that they don't have what they had back there, but they were enslaved and restless. And here's the thing about restlessness, right? Restlessness will always deceive us into believing that that is the place of rest, or we need to find the place of rest back where we were. The Lord said to Moses, I will rain down bread from heaven for you. I'll provide. The people are to go out each day and gather enough for that day. In this way, I will test them and see whether they will follow my instructions. On the 6th day, they are to prepare what they bring in, and that is to be twice as much as they gather on the other days. Why? Because God provided so that they may rest on the 7th-day Sabbath. We read this in Exodus 20. He establishes his 10 commandments. Remember the Sabbath day by keeping it holy. 6 days you shall labor, do all your work. 7th day is a Sabbath to the Lord your God. On it you shall not do any work, neither you, nor your son or daughter, nor your male or female servant, nor your animals, nor any foreigner residing in your towns. For in 6 days the Lord made the heavens and the earth, the sea, and all that is in them. But he rested on the 7th day. Therefore the Lord blessed the Sabbath day and made it holy. That most literally in this moment, as they're walking out of restlessness into experiencing rest in God, he invites them in out of their grumbling, okay, out of their frustration. God invites Moses, invites the people to feast upon the manna that he provides from the heavens. And on the 6th day, he provides enough so they can collect it for 2 days so that they can rest on the 7th day, and they can ultimately play out what it looks like to rest, not just simply in their own lives, but in relationship with God. And I noticed that when God talks about the Sabbath day, and the Sabbath day is instituted for the Israelite people to rest and to be reminded of their trust in God. It was an active weekly practice for the Israelites that they would Sabbath on a very specific day. They would rest. They wouldn't do any work. And they would give themselves to feasting and celebrating. They would give themselves to resting and worshiping in God. It was a reminder that he provides and that he sustains and that he is the one that's led them and he's the one that's freed them. And what I find fascinating inside of this, and we read it in Genesis 2 also, or Genesis 1, I should say, the Sabbath day is holy. And it's holy because God instituted it. Right? He, as the creator of the universe, said, this is worth me instituting and inviting you into. We should take a note of that. He could have done anything the first day or the creation. And he invited us to recognize the goodness of creation and ultimately what it means to rest in him inside of our everyday week. But I also think it's interesting that it is set apart, it is holy, because it not only reminds us of who God is, but it also forces us to live in such that way. By ultimately resting in him, it forces us to live out the faith we say we believe. That if God's in control, that God is sovereign, that God is the one who is playing this all out, that what he was inviting the Israelites into was not simply to legalistically check a box off, but ultimately to trust him. It is set apart to invite us into a faith journey. A physical day for the Israelites was set aside to rest spiritually in his work and what he has done. Now Jesus comes onto the scene. Jesus, the Son of the Father, was sent by the Father to come and ultimately live a perfect life, die the death we deserved, rise again so that we could have life. Jesus inviting us into this rest, it shows us that this is not the first time we've been invited into rest. God has been continually inviting his people into rest. And what we see in Jesus' invitation is this, is that it's no longer contained in a day, but now it's in a person. That ultimately you and I will find the most fulfilling, most life-giving, eternal and earthly rest, not in making sure that I check the thing off the box, but that I'm leaning into the person of Jesus. Jesus, who ultimately gives me everything that I need. And that's where Matthew 11 comes in. Jesus is the only one who can satisfy our restless hearts. And we're going to walk through his invitation and make some observations on how this could play out for us. Okay? So, Matthew 11, if you want to jump to verse 25, that's where we're going to start reading. Let me give you some backgrounds because there's context to this. Matthew 11, verses 1 through 19, John the Baptist, who is a cousin to Jesus, he's in prison because he shared with Herod, the ruler of the area, that he didn't like how he was living. And so Herod threw him into prison and is about to kill him. And John the Baptist sends two of his disciples to Jesus, and he sends two of his disciples to Jesus, and he asks his disciples to ask Jesus if Jesus is the one they've been waiting for, which is code for, are you the Messiah, the Savior of the world? Are you the one who's going to free the people? Are you the one who has come to do for us what we could not do for ourselves? And John the Baptist sends his disciples go to Jesus, and Jesus essentially answers them, yes, I am him. Like, I'm the one you've been waiting for. I'm the one that you have been longing for. I'm the one who has come to save you. We see then later on, Matthew write about Jesus speaking about unrepentant towns, and he did miracles in these towns, and he did certain things in these towns, and these towns would not turn to him. That they saw everything, and they had every visual of who Jesus is and what he is come to do, and they were given every opportunity to turn to Jesus, and yet they didn't. Then we get to Matthew 11, 25 through 30. Because my fear is this, is that we can read verse 28 through 30 kind of on its own and miss that there's a context happening, and Jesus is continually inviting people into relationship with him. He's reminding us he is the one. And then he also reminds us that ultimately to have a childlike faith is what is going to allow us to come. This is what we read in Matthew 11, 25 through 30. At that time, after he's done explaining everything else, Jesus said, I praise you, Father, Lord of heaven and earth. He's kind of having a conversation. Everybody's seeing, but he's having a conversation with his Father, Lord of heaven and earth. Because you have hidden these things from the wise and learned, revealed them to little children. Yes, Father, for this is what you are pleased to do. All things have been committed to me by my Father. No one knows the Son except the Father, and no one knows the Father except the Son, those to whom the Son chooses to reveal him. Jesus recognizes a few things. The Father sent Jesus to humanity to save, not condemn. Then Jesus tells us this, that Jesus reveals the Father to humanity. If you want to know anything about God, look at Jesus. If you want to know who God is and what he is all about, look at Jesus. Jesus, the Father, Spirit, they're one, same God. And so when you read about Jesus, what he did on this earth, that is the heart of God playing out very tangibly. But also this, that Jesus reminds us, recognizes that the unlikely respond to the Father's revealing of Jesus, that the unlikely respond to Jesus' invitation. What's beautiful about this in verse 25 is that he says, I praise you. You have hidden these things from the wise and learned and revealed them to little children. That before we jump into how do I rest and where do I rest, that you and I, our hearts, need to run into Jesus, be ready to respond to Jesus like a little child would. Like a faith of a child, as Jesus would go on to say later. That ultimately it takes a humble heart and a humble spirit and a willingness to get lower than I ever thought possible and to recognize that I am weaker than I ever could imagine. I sing Jesus Loves Me to my kids every once in a while, right? There's a line in there that, even though we're weak, he is strong. And it's a wonderful reminder that I, at a root level, need Jesus. And the only way that I'll get there is if I, by faith, respond to him like a child. Like a child would to their parent, running in and saying, I need help. I'm not sure what to do. That's the intro to this invitation. Matthew 11, 28. He says, come to me, all you who are weary and burdened, and I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you. Learn from me. I'm gentle and humble in heart. You will find rest for your souls. For my yoke is easy and my burden is light. Right? Do you recognize that you are restless? And the question then becomes, what do I do with that? Listen, I think that there's two misunderstandings to rest, and then we'll jump into what do I do with the invitation of Jesus. I'll get there, I promise. The first is this. I think the misunderstanding to rest first is constantly running to find rest. I don't know if this is me. Like, I have to get everything done to be rested. But what's interesting about needing everything to be done is you always run into things always needing to be done. And so Jess is like, why don't you just sit down? I'm like, not everything's done. I need to finish everything to rest. And what's interesting is it just becomes this cycle where I'm always chasing rest. And the more I do, I assume I'll do it more. Right? I'll tell Jess when I'm sick. She's like, you should rest. I'm like, I'm going to run faster because I'm going to outrun the sickness. Right? That's how I feel about rest. I'm like, I'm just going to run faster to run into rest. And what's going to happen is I'm going to run faster and then I'm going to face plant into rest, right? And that's how it's going to happen. And so I think we live in a culture that's like rest is for later, or rest is for then, or when you have everything figured out, or you have the money, or you have the time, or you've retired, or maybe once everything's done and over with, that's when you rest. When you're here, you work hard, and maybe sometimes you play hard, but rest is never found in that. The second, I think, misunderstanding is this. I think we are constantly redefining rest to fabricate rest. And so I think there's either we were trying so hard to search for rest, but we run by it because we're doing so much, and we think if we do more, we'll get there eventually. The other is that we can fabricate rest. That we can fabricate rest and make rest something like, sitting and binge watching TV, or kind of eating junk food all the time, or just chilling on the couch for 8 hours. Or we can fabricate rest as if I just get the vacation in, then I'll be fine. Now listen, all those things are great. All those things are fine. But what ends up happening is that even though I might go to those things, they don't give me the fulfilled ultimate rest that I need. What I end up doing is I end up just distracting myself. I end up entertaining myself. And sometimes, if not all the time, at least for me, I leave feeling more exhausted than I do rested. So I run into just more restlessness, even though I'm fabricating what seems to be like rest. So Jesus gives us a different way. And here's the thing. He gives us a different way. And I'm going to, because Jesus was busy, and I'm also going to be gracious towards whatever season you're in. Because Jesus was busy. I think he might have been the busiest person to walk on the face of the planet. He could do miracles. We can't. He was like on demand, right? He was busy. So it wasn't like Jesus was just like straight up chilling by the beach and he's talking about come and rest. He was busy, but he very specifically spent time with his Father, and that's what he's inviting us to do. First thing I would have you write down is this: because Jesus is the giver of rest, I can rest in his grace, not our guilt. I can rest in his great grace, not our guilt. What I find fascinating about this passage is it goes deeper than just simply kind of go get a day off, right? There's maybe application there, of course, but he wants to go deeper. And what he says here is this. It's interesting. I'll give you rest, but then he goes and he says, you will find rest for your souls, which feels different than going out on the golf course and shooting 18 holes, right? It feels like there's something there that he's getting to that's deeper. And what he says is this. He says, come to me, those who are weary and burdened. Who in this room is weary and burdened? Right? Xavier was honest, right? You're weary and burdened. And here's what's interesting about this weary and burdened terminology. This is what I read, that burdens often, right, when they're using this terminology, weary and burdened, it's talking about burdens we put on ourselves or burdens that others put on us. It can be both ends. Some of us in this room, we are burdened by the pressure we put on ourselves. We're burdened by the self-guilt, the self-shame. We're burdened by the things that we think we should be doing, but we're not doing. We're burdened by looking at other people's social media and saying, we have to accomplish these things, and we have to get this done, and we have to look like that. My life doesn't look like that yet. I don't have that house. I don't have the kids that are doing this and that. For others of us, we're burdened by others. And we're burdened by others in this way. We're burdened by the pain or the stuff that's been done to us. We're burdened by what is happening around us. We're burdened by what we're looking at inside of life around us. We're looking at social media. We're looking at the news, and we're burdened by all the things that are happening. We're burdened by the people that have made mistakes towards us. We're burdened by people's expectations of us. We're burdened. What's interesting is this: the most significant burden that you and I exist in is the sin that we live in. Is that you and I are most burdened by our sin. It's the thing that produces the most pressure inside of us. It's also the thing that most impacts us from others. The sin that ultimately plays out. And like I said, it's not just simply behavioral, it's detrimental. It's detrimental to relationships. It's detrimental to us being able to rest. And so we walk around with feelings of guilt and shame. I didn't do enough over here. They're putting this on me over here. How do I deal with this? Guilt saying I did something bad. Shame saying I am bad. And we live inside of this restlessness of saying I must be this, or I must have this, or this must be who I am. And we allow that to be the thing to guide our life and to dictate how we respond to life. And so when Jesus says, come and rest, he's inviting us into his grace and out of our guilt and our shame, first and foremost. Because you and I cannot provide in and of ourselves, we cannot provide the rest that we need. You and I cannot provide the rest that we need that ultimately Jesus offers us. I would say it like this: our good works cannot be our good news. Our good works cannot be our good news. That you and I can never, in and of ourselves, provide the rest that we need for our souls. We'll always endlessly be restless trying to figure out how to deal with our guilt and our shame on our own, and always kind of cyclically finding ourselves in the pit. We'll always be there. Our good works cannot be our good news. And our eternal security is not based on what I give, it's based on what he gave. And so sometimes I run faster because I want to make a better pursuit of God, or I want to make a point to God, or I want to make sure I'm seen by God so that I can get off my guilt and shame. I'm doing enough for God. And for some of us, we're trying to find rest by doing more for God. But in the process, right, what we're ultimately looking for is some sort of security in who I am and what ultimately life is about. And the God of the universe provided us Jesus, who is our sacrificial lamb, so that we could rest. Provided Jesus, our Father in heaven, provided the Son Jesus so that we could find eternal rest and know what earthly rest is. Isaiah 53, verse 7. This is what the prophet Isaiah writes. He was oppressed, he's talking about Jesus, and afflicted, yet he did not open his mouth. He was led like a lamb to the slaughter, as a sheep before his shearers is silent, so he did not open his mouth. But ultimately, he laid down his life so that we could experience eternal rest. That when we look at Jesus, yes, we see that he did miracles, he did teachings, he was an awesome person to be around on this earth, and he provided so much life while he was on this earth, but he came ultimately to bring us out of restlessness into an eternal rest with him in heaven. That you and I can run to him for that. Some of us, our guilt and shame is creating a cyclical effect of restlessness, and we've never given that over to Jesus. We've just tried to run harder, or we've fabricated other ways of resting. We've fabricated kind of denying it or being distracted to not even worry about it, but it's still there. And at a deep level, you're here this morning and you're wondering, is there more to life? Because I'm not sure where else to go. And Jesus would say, run into me. What I did for you covers you, forgives you, invites you in. So how do I do that? James 4 would tell us this. Submit yourselves then to God, resist the devil, he will flee from you. Come near to God and he will come near to you. Wash your hands, you sinners, and purify your hearts, you double-minded. Grieve, mourn, and wail. Change your laughter to mourning and your joy to gloom. Humble yourselves before the Lord, and he will lift you up. Are you willing to humble yourselves and confess your need for Jesus? That's where it starts. The moment that I get lower, the moment I'll recognize how big he is. And the moment that happens, the moment I've turned the dial up on recognizing his grace. He's the only one who can provide me what I need at a deep soul level that ultimately allows me to rest not just in I have a home, but in security in him, in being a child of his. I am free, I'm forgiven, I'm justified, I'm loved, I'm adopted, I have hope, I have joy, I can have rest in him. That's what his grace provides. Some of you this morning, the first step is to come to Jesus with your guilt and shame and allowing him to nail that to the cross that he died on. He went through the most restless of moments in the Garden of Gethsemane, all the way to the cross. He died on the cross, was buried in the tomb. He exchanged our place for his so that you and I could rest in him. And some of you need to jump into resting with him for the first time. Instead of trying to deal with your guilt and shame, trying to run faster, trying to fabricate how I can distract myself from it, it is confessing, humbling, running into him. So for some of us, I would argue all of us at some level, we need to come to Jesus in humility and say yes to him. We need to start there. How do I lean into that? Because secondly is this. He would invite us to come rest in his grace, not our guilt, but he would ultimately also come tell us to rest in my yoke, not your way. Now for us, we read that and we're like, we're talking about like an egg yolk? What's happening here, right? Like rest in his egg yolk? What's yoke, right? Because we don't live in like agricultural world. But in agricultural world, often they would have 2 oxen or 2 different large animals pulling a plow together, and they'd be yoked together to do more work and to be able to work together. And so they would often pair like a more experienced ox with a younger one to kind of train and to teach and to lead, right? And to ultimately kind of lay that yoke on them, and they would plow. And that's how it would work in the agricultural days. In modern days, we don't necessarily see a lot of that because we have John Deere now, and so we don't need to worry about plowing with ox, right? But the closest example I could come up with is I worked for a tree company one summer during my college years, and me and a buddy of mine worked there, and we just split wood for like 8 to 10 hours a day, every day. It was like my favorite job because you could just put your earbuds in and you're just like going to town. And I remember me and him worked on the same splitter. And we had to be so in tune. And I was there for a little bit longer, so I taught him how to do it. You had to be so in tune because if you weren't, there was a chance you could lose a finger because it would get caught in the splitter. And that happened to both of us once. I didn't lose any fingers, but it got caught, right? And you knew we weren't on the same page, right? And so what Jesus is saying is this, is that I want you to take upon my yoke, that literally I want you to join me in this spiritual journey of yours. I want you to join me, come next to me, and I will show you the way of that. A yoke was very often in first century religious terms used to describe a rabbi's teaching of the scriptures. So yoke would be used, a rabbi would say, come put my yoke upon yourself. And he's talking to his disciples, his learners, his students, and saying, hey, I want you to put this teaching upon yourselves. I want you to put this interpretation of Scripture. When your teachers, students in school say, I want you to learn this, it's often their way of teaching and their method of teaching with their information that they want to teach you. That's what this rabbi was doing. And Jesus says, I have a yoke, but it's different. Jesus was inviting us to abide in him. Inviting us to abide in him, and his yoke was based around the greatest commandments, love God and love others. And as you follow me, those things should stir in your heart more and more and more. And the desires of those things should stir in your heart more and more and more. Everything Jesus did was based around loving God and loving others. In the Message translation, this is how Jesus puts it in Matthew 11. I'll show you how to take a real rest, which I love. It's like there's fake rest. You know, I can fake rest all the time. Real rest. Walk with me. Work with me. Listen, rest is not just the opposite of work, right? Rest sometimes involves getting dirty and following Jesus and being able to give ourselves over to him in very humbling ways. He says, I want you to walk with me, work with me. Watch how I do it. Learn the unforced rhythms of grace. I won't lay anything heavy or ill-fitting on you. He first says, take my yoke. He's inviting us into his way of life. He's inviting his way, his teaching, and he's saying it's light compared to the massive legalistic rules of the religious leaders of his day. That what often would happen is they would add things, they would add layers, they would add to-dos, they would add the checklist upon the teaching that their disciples would have had to do, and this is how you live up to the measure. And Jesus says, if you compare it to those ways, then my way is light. My way is light. I'm not going to add anything that's ill-fitting. I'm not going to add anything that ultimately is heavy. I'm going to invite you in, and I want you to follow me. And as you follow me, you won't be able to help, but ultimately take upon me inside of who you are. And he says you have a decision. To take upon his yoke is a decision. You and I have an invitation there that either we can jump in or not. Either we can give control to God and trust him or not. We can either go along with Jesus or not. John Mark Comer says it like this: to walk with Jesus is to walk with a slow, unhurried pace. Hurry is the death of prayer and only impedes and spoils our work. It never advances it. The faster I want to go, usually the more out of pace I am with Jesus. And usually I'm pulling Jesus along instead of walking beside him and allowing him to pull me along. The yoke is meant to allow us to see that Jesus is a part of that yoke. When Jesus says, take upon my yoke, he's not saying take upon it so I can go get some water and rest. He's like, it's a two-person job. I'm in it with you, which is deeply comforting to me. That he leads us. The invitation is gracious, and Jesus is next to us and teaching us along the way. His yoke is light because of his way, and he is with us. And he is going to go with us, and he promises that. So if you're like, well, where do I start? How do I? Just ask Jesus. He wants to go there with you, and he is there with you when you put the yoke on of his. And he says, I will teach you this gentle and humble of heart I am, and I want to teach you my ways, and I want to teach you what it looks like to live life with me, and I want you ultimately to be transformed by that, and I'm going to lead you. And do you know why they paired a more experienced ox with a less experienced ox? Because when the less experienced ox started to pull the way it wasn't supposed to go, the more experienced could pull it back in the right direction because it was stronger usually and more aged and more experienced. Jesus is that for us. When you put the yoke on and you start kind of leaning the other way, he will pull you back. It's his generous and gracious invitation. John Mark Comer goes on to say, an easy life isn't an option, but an easy yoke is. This doesn't mean life's going to be easy. It doesn't mean that you're not going to have pressures. It doesn't mean that you aren't going to have the moments that don't make sense and are hard. That's still there. But you don't have to put on a heavy and ill-fitting yoke. Jesus says, follow me and I will show you the way. This is the way. Well, my Mandalorian fans, right? This is the way, Jesus says. Come with me. But I think what else is fascinating is this, that as I take upon his yoke and I walk with him, I see the gracious invitation that he leads us. I also see that he wants to be in it with us, and he promises that. He's going to pull me in the right direction. But I also, when we're connected to his yoke, I can trust his will for my life. I think a lot of times I've asked myself, what is God's will for my life? Like it's a game for God. Like he's like hiding it. He wants me to find it. He's like, what's my will for your life? What's my will for your life? I hope you find it, right? It's not how it works. Jesus very clearly articulates the will that he has for our lives, which is ultimately to serve and worship God and to make disciples who make disciples. And what Jesus invites us into by taking upon his yoke is that we can have security in knowing that we are following his will, not trying to find it. Apart from his yoke, I will always be searching for some sort of will for my life. What's the plan? What's the purpose? What's the will? When I'm in that yoke, it's almost just like the oxen. It's like tight around that ox, and it gives them some structure. It gives them some direction, and there's something secure about that's on them. And when we're in Jesus' yoke, there's something secure about that. I know the direction he's going to lead me is his will. And what he asked me to do is serve, worship, love others, love him, and make disciples in the process of wherever I am in that moment. That is the invitation. And so when you and I take upon the yoke, listen, sometimes I'm like, what does that mean? So if you're sitting there, you're like, what does that mean? I'm like, yep. That's why Jesus is there. Jesus, all he asks is for you to come to him, rest in him, take upon his yoke, and he will lead you as you follow him. So this morning, the question I land on is this: do you need to come to Jesus this morning? Do you need to have a come to Jesus talk with Jesus this morning? Do you need to spend time with Jesus this morning, resting in who he is? Are you tired, worn out, burnt out on religion, burnt out on achieving, burnt out on the world's way? Are you in a hard, challenging, exhausting, taxing, circumstantial season where you don't have a break and you're trying to figure out what in the world do I do next? And Jesus is inviting all of us. I have some things I want to encourage you to do. 6 questions, and I hate making it 6 questions, so I'm sorry. But 3 of them are what I want you to start praying about. 3 of them are what I want you to start talking to God about inside of your week, okay? I'm sorry I did this to you all, but I think it'll get us there, okay? The first question that I would pray over is this: do I need to acknowledge Jesus provided eternal rest? Do I need to acknowledge that Jesus provided eternal rest? Do you acknowledge that there is a rest that is there, that is in him and him alone? And if you've never met Jesus there in that place, and you need to go there with Jesus for the first time, we'd love to talk about what it means to do that. The second question I would ask is, do I need to ask God to provide tangible means to receive rest? Do I need to ask God to provide tangible means to receive rest? Some of us are like, I don't know where I'm going to get that at. I don't know where I'm going to find rest. I can't get a breather. I'm stressed out. I hate life. I hate this burden here, this burden there. You're stressed out. Well, God is the eternal Father and creator of everything. Why don't we start by going to him and asking if he can provide a tangible means to finding rest in your everyday week? Start with him, not with your schedule, because your schedule will lie to you, okay? And then lastly, do I need to apply physical rest this week to remind myself of the spiritual rest I have in Jesus? The Sabbath is healthy physically for a number of reasons. Taking a day off is healthy for a number of reasons, okay? It just is. But as followers of Christ, we should use that day off to remind us of the spiritual rest we have in Jesus, to remind us that there's a deeper rest that he has provided us. So, what should I ask myself if I'm in that place? Where do I find rest? Here's what I would ask. 3 questions. I'll blow through these really simply. How will you rest this week? Which I set this up really well because it's Thanksgiving week. Some of you are like, shut up. But some of you are like, yeah, I'll eat turkey and sleep. Right? How will you rest this week? Finding what is it? Taking a day off, praying, spending time in silence, reading scripture, going for a walk, having fun with friends, worshiping, doing something that brings you joy, spending time with your family. Like, how will you rest this week? And make it intentional. Don't make it flip. If we make it flippant, here's what I do. The TV goes on, right? Or the screens go on. I'm resting. The most restless piece of equipment in the world, right? But that's often where we divert. So plan it. Figure out how you're going to rest. The second question is, where will you rest this week? Okay? Where will you rest this week? And then when will you rest this week? So all I want you to do is just plan it, okay? So the worship team comes up. I just want to end in prayer as you consider maybe where rest inside of your life needs to exist, not simply to say I did a day off, but ultimately to align your life to Jesus. So Father, we thank you for who you are and all that you do. Thank you for loving us and leading us. Thank you for giving us more than what we could ask or imagine. Thank you for your grace. And as we just slow down for a moment, Father, you have been so good to us that you would provide Jesus as the one who would do for us what we could not do for ourselves. Father, thank you. Thank you that you are where eternal rest is found. And what Jesus did for us gives us a whole new meaning to life. And that, Father, we can trust you and know you and live with you forever because you decided to come down onto this earth and get restless with us and die a restless death and ultimately be put to rest so that we could have life out of our restlessness. Thank you, Jesus. And then for others of us in this room, Father, we're thinking about how to actually take that and make that something in our week. Would you graciously invite us into your rest this week very tangibly? Help us to run to you if we don't know where to go with it. Help us to find you in the midst of wrestling with it, and help us to put on the yoke of what it means to follow you and be with you in all of life. So, Father, we're thankful. You love us, you care for us, you're there for us. We give this all to you, Father. We pray this in your name.
Thanks again for joining us this week. We hope you listen in again. Like and share this podcast with your friends. Join us next week as we launch into a brand new series, our Christmas series, called He Will Be Called.